Well, this is going to be one of the best programs ever. You're not going to believe we have got Larry Goldberg back, and Larry just happens to be a software guy who knows a lot about Dojo. He is a guy who's done a lot of work in India. And then, he loves and cares about Elon and Tesla. So that combination should make for a great show. Great to have you back, Larry.
Thanks, Randy. Love to be here.
All right. For those of you who like Larry and you think that you want to get him back I'm planning to have him here every Saturday morning. So if you like that idea, please hit the like button right now. I want to see like triple the likes I normally get. And then also hit subscribe and notify. And that way you'll be notified because I might also have a special show with Larry later this week. And plus all kinds of other good stuff coming. And then the Patreon. And then you want to follow Larry over on Twitter. Larry, is there anything they should do besides following you on Twitter?
No,
Pretty much that's it. Okay. All right. Well, let's get into the meat of it. Let's start with the week that just was.
Wow.
So I said at the beginning of the week it was going to be all about the Fed chairman. It seems like maybe it was all about the Fed chairman.
Right.
What was your big takeaway from this last week?
Yeah, it was. I mean, he tried to throw cold water on the excitement and the energy around this whole idea of the pause or the whatever he wanted to call it. And he did a pretty damn good job of it. He did a really excellent job of it. I was seeing a lot of my friends tweeting about how they were getting out and they were selling and they sold at the top, blah, blah, blah. My response was, I'm very actively doing nothing.
Yeah. So so far you're proving to be pretty astute because the market has bounced around a little.
Yeah.
But, we're pretty much at the end of the week. Certainly on Tesla, we're still better off having held than having bailed. So.
Yeah, these are difficult times. I mean, I think we've been through, a form of recession. I predicted a much more serious recession than we had. I predicted a classic recession. We haven't had a classic recession. I predicted quite a deep one. Just shows you how bad at predicting I am. I think it kind of strange. I think the auto business has still got a way to go, particularly, I think Tesla's got a way to go. I've already opined before on this show that they're kind of between models. They're in this difficult stage where they have, older model types, older model years kind of rolling down and they haven't got new product in. I blame, the pandemic and the caution and also just the stage that they're in. I think they recognize now that they could have been a little bit more active, although given the supply chain and the uncertainty, I think I understand where they are. But you have to look at what BYD have done in this period. And, they've done very well. But then, BYD are prepared to invest much higher amount of money in R&D and development than Elon's ever been prepared to. He's a very, very cautious manager, very, very cautious kind of, governance around cash and money because he's been hurt so badly in the past. So it's understandable, but they're in this position now, and it's going to be a year or two. If the Cybertruck actually does roll out in the third quarter or early in the fourth quarter, I think we're in for a good run. But, people are saying it's already in production and the production lines, but I just don't see it. I just can't believe it because, they're still installing these massive machines. It takes some time to get those things active. It takes some time to get a production line on. So, if they make end of third quarter, I think that would be enormous. So, yeah. Answer is, I think the stock is in for a tough ride through to the end of the third quarter into the fourth quarter, and then all depends upon the introduction of Cybertruck, the progress in Mexico, and how German market holds up. So those are all the variables, I think.
Yeah, I've been talking, Larry, about the execution at this point. So, not Tesla probably has a reputation right now for being absolutely amazing at execution,
Right.
except that they're commonly late with brand new rollouts. And
Right.
this has happened over and over again. So that's the reputation. But to the extent that we see execution over these next quarters, both in total units sold, in margins, etc., I'm famously saying we're back to all-time highs by the end of the year. That also assumes that the market continues up. So if the market is positive and Tesla executes and Cybertruck comes out, those are my combination.
I'm almost to the point where I think the market could be neutral between now and the end of the year. And if the other two hold, I think two of the three have to hold.
Okay.
And the one that least troubles me is the market, because Tesla has shown the ability to move counter to the market. I'm not that concerned about the impact on the market. I'm very concerned about, I don't want Elon getting involved in these wrestling matches. I don't want, just when we're past the Twitter noise, we have to get into this noise. Less noise would be better. I'm very much looking forward to the launch of Starship, a successful launch of Starship.
Yes.
Successful orbit of Starship.
Yes.
I'm very much looking forward to, the launch of Cybertruck. I'm very much looking forward to more news on, Model 2, some sort of announcement of Model, whatever I don't know what the name is. I'm less concerned about the market. I think even if the market were up, absent those other two or one of those other two, I think we may see stagnation or even a downward pressure on the price of the stock, which wouldn't be a bad thing from my perspective. I would accumulate, below these levels.
Yeah. Well, Larry, so one of the things I wanted to talk to you about today is, obviously all this conversation about India.
Yeah.
So you have, you mentioned to me before the show that you've done a lot of hiring there, you've done a lot of business building there. Talk to me about a little bit about your experience there, but then how do you see this move by Tesla to invest in India? How do you look at India in terms of its future? Is it going to be the next South Korea?
Yeah, India is the next China and the next South Korea. And by that, I mean that India is going to grow as fast as China did, as fast as South Korea did. India's, South Korea is fairly bureaucratic. India takes that to a whole nother level. I mean, the bureaucracy in India is quite remarkable and, out of all proportion to anything we can imagine. Look, my history with India goes back 30 years. My first experience with India is I started hiring some Indian, newly arrived immigrants. And my first hire was a young man who today is a very senior executive at one of the major banks in the IT space. And he and I formed a fantastic partnership. I have a great imagination in IT, in software, but not the skills. He had extraordinary skills and some pretty good imagination too. He stayed with me, which was for me unique because most of the people that I worked with just couldn't make the leaps that I was trying to get them to make, and he definitely did. And I was very struck. And then we brought his brother, and then subsequently his cousin, and they formed the nucleus of what became, a little Indian community in my company. And that really set the platform for me making an investment in India a startup company with a young man who was incredibly brilliant, a little difficult to manage, in fact, impossible to manage, but incredibly brilliant. And he built, with our help, with my help and my son's help, he built a company in India. And, we were partners with him and his father in that Indian company, and we built it. And it became, my own software company was becoming too big to manage, and have these two companies. And I sold to private equity our share in the venture. But I saw in that venture, I saw how companies start and blossom in India like mushrooms. All the bureaucracy, all the red tape, all the white tape, all the bad infrastructure, notwithstanding, it just blossomed. And it blossomed, people talk about the low cost of wages. That's not pertinent at all. It blossomed because of the work culture, the incredible education these people get, just the application of, old line British education and this incredible Indian spirit. And it was just amazing. And when I sold my company in 2014 to a mid-sized public company, one of the first things I did is I wrote a white paper to the CEO and said, we have to move to India.
Oh.
And, they employed at that point probably 1,000 people. Today, they're 5,000 people. I said, we have to move to India. You cannot sustain this company by running it out of, at that time it was run out of Israel and the US and Canada. We need not only the lower cost of the Indian resources, which to me wasn't the major function. It was the creativity, productivity, the attitude of these people and their willingness to actually get things done. And as a result, I don't know if it directly as a result or whatever, anyway, we acquired a small company in India. I don't think it was a direct result of that. And that company in India grew from, when we acquired it, was about 100 people. It's now 3,000 people.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah. And this company that I sold to, which was at about 1,000 people, is now 5,000 people, of which 3,000 are in India.
Wow.
And India has become kind of the epicenter of some of the more important developments. So, very long story, but I think it gives you a sense of the opportunity in India. Now, are they as inexpensive as China? No. Are they as productive as China? Possibly not. But they're creative. They have a fantastic attitude, can do, will do. And I don't think, I honestly think they are a much, I hesitate to use the word, but I think they have a high level of integrity in their dealings than China. And I think we'd be much more comfortable working with them than working with China. And the other thing is, they love coming to the United States. And they've proven to be the most incredible resources in our revolution. You only have to look around. I mean, when I used to say this 10 or 20 years ago, people were very skeptical. Now, the evidence is so clear that I don't have to argue or even debate the issue. And you only have to look at the leadership across the companies in the country, in the most innovative companies in the country, and you see, the quality of these people, and it's terms of volume, but it's also in terms of the education. So I've spoken enough. I don't know if I've given you a sense of my excitement about working with Indian people and with the Indian subcontinent.
Yeah, all of my experience, and I have a fair amount of experience working in India as well. I almost sold my plastics manufacturing business to an Indian firm. The two brothers couldn't agree. One said yes, the other said no. So
Yeah,
I
that's
ended up doing it. But
Indian story, yeah.
but my experience with folks from India in business has been 100% positive.
Yeah.
I can't always say that about China. And I've done massive amounts of work in China, can continue to import from China to this day, but have been importing from China for, well, almost since China started being seriously active at export to the United States. So, yeah, not to say that China's not good. I've again done a ton of business, and a lot of it's been excellent.
Yeah.
What about Modi? What do you think about the premier, prime minister?
I like him. He's not popular amongst the liberal left, but if you look at the left-wing governments that have been in India, they've been a disaster. They've kept that country in the backwaters for so long. They kept that country in the backwaters for so long, and so I really, I fear the return of the socialists. I think it's one of the great red flags of working with India. So, when the Conservative Party took power, whatever it's called today, and now Modi is, I think he has some baggage, but he's done some good things. Now, what he hasn't done well is, weed out this bureaucracy. In fact, if anything, he's encouraged its development because it brings so much power to the political class.
Of course.
So I think that's, for me, a red flag.
So what about the infrastructure? So, I think the things that almost anybody who pays attention knows about India is they've got 200 engineering schools, and they're popping out engineers every single day, that they mostly speak English, they're very good at speaking English, that they have enough of that heritage from the English, from the time that the English were obviously very, very active there, that they know the Western methods of commerce, the Western methods of capitalism, that they have some of that root idea of independent living, which is different than a lot of the other Eastern countries. But what I don't know, and which I've now heard a lot of give and take on, is the infrastructure. Good news is that they're working from a blank slate, so to speak, on a lot of this infrastructure, like Japan, Taiwan, South Korea, etc., Singapore were, 70 years ago. Bad news is maybe they're a little behind, and that the infrastructure could get in the way of them moving as fast, let's say, as China or South Korea did.
It depends what you mean by infrastructure. If you're talking about the roads, they are ghastly. If you talk about, the internet, and you talk about the digital infrastructure, it's incredible. It's really outstanding. So, there are, I don't know what the number is, but I think it's 1 billion cell phones in India. It's some gigantic number. And many of them are 2G, the old, flip phone. But the 5G networks are growing, very rapidly. The cost of cell service is like zero. It's as close to zero as not to matter anymore. It's spotty. So there are parts of, so if you're in Bangalore, as our office was, there are parts of Bangalore where you cannot distinguish from being in Bangalore or being in, a decent, industrial park or modern development in the US. Unfortunately, when you walk out of that park, you walk into the third world. I mean, in some places, even the fourth world. I mean, I tell a long and sorry story about our drive from one city to another where we probably should have flown. I asked how long it would take. They said 3 to 4 hours. Well, 8 hours later, we arrived. And, the drive was a nightmare. I mean, you're passing a truck in a no parking zone on a 2-lane road as you're rounding a blind corner. And as you come around the blind corner, you see somebody's doing the same on the other way. You close your eyes, and when you open them, like 15 terrified seconds later, everything's fine. So how does FSD work in that environment?
That's yeah.
But there's a huge road development system going on right now, and the rate of development is crazy. So, and that's the point to be made. And that was the argument I was having in exchanges on Twitter the other day. Don't look at where India is today. Look at where India is going to be in 10 years' time, because today is the time to actually take advantage of them. If you wait for 10 years, 20 years, it'll be gone. It'll be way past you. So where India is today is the moment to strike. And I think Elon's timing it just right. I think that, he's in a very good position. Tesla is in a very good position to negotiate a very good deal with the Indians, and they are tough. They drive a very tough deal, but now's the time. And there's argument that it's not such a big market. Look, India is the 3rd largest car market in the world, period.
Ask Japan, yeah.
Oh yeah. And not only is the 3rd largest, but it may also be the fastest growing.
Mm.
Now everybody says, yeah, they buy 3-wheelers. That's true. They buy they do have a lot of 3-wheelers, but the rate of growth of the middle class is the fastest growing class of all. And that's the class that are buying cars far more than the roads can take. Look, I tell people, I watched my folks, we had of the 3,000 people in India, our little team was only about 100 or even less than 100, but I watched those kids they were, because we hired them right out of college. I watched them starting with 2-wheelers, advancing to these tiny little these tiny little cars that they have, and advancing to the Mitsubishis and the Nissans and the Toyotas and the sort of middle class car. I watched this progress as they climbed the ladder, and now today, salaries in India are practically competing with salaries in the US. When I say competing, they're practically at the level of salaries in the US. There's not that much difference between that anymore. There's, so, I think
the opportunity is big.
I think the opportunity is gigantic.
Yeah. So I was recently in South Korea, in Japan, and in Singapore on a trip. 3 of the most high-tech places in the world, 3 of the safest places in the world, 3 of the cleanest places in the world. And it occurred to me as we made that trip, because those were the 3 places we went on that same trip, all 3 of those were basically zero. They were at zero in the 50s. They had been either bombed out, or in the case of Singapore, they had been at war for generations, even centuries. And there was just basically nothing there. South Korea, of course, the war, and Japan. So in 70 years, they have become amazing. And now we're watching China move through some of that same kind of situation. India, maybe next, huh?
Well, Japan is an interesting story. I mean, I went to Japan in early 80s, my first trip there, and it was at its peak. It was in very dominant position, industrially, and it was challenging the United States in a very serious way. And people talked about the Japanese century. And then, they reached that point of, firstly, there was a huge bubble, the bubble burst, and they never recovered. And they never recovered because of, the population decline has been incredible. And I see the same thing happening in China. We're miles from that in India. I mean, the Indian population, and by the way, that's happening in Korea too, but the Indian population is exploding, continues to explode. Now, what will happen when they become wealthy, and how the countryside becomes wealthy, and how they overcome this gigantic unemployment problem that they're going to be facing? Well, it's not so much unemployment in India, but
underemployment.
Yeah, absolute underemployment. I mean, if you go into the countryside, these people are subsistent. They're living from hand to mouth in in these farming communities, or in these poor villages where they kind of have this just sustain themselves through very primitive means. And some of them are supported by the government. Now, how that translates, how you China did it. In China, they still have, these country areas which are very poor and, sustain themselves from monies coming from, their immigrant or their migrant workers. And maybe that's what's going to happen in India. Maybe that is the pattern for India. But, in India, the rate of growth of this middle class is really astonishing. Maybe it's going to mirror what happened in China. Now, what happens to the population then, I don't know.
So I read an article or watched a video a couple of years ago. Maybe this is what Elon has in mind, that the number one thing that would transform India, Pakistan, and some of these other countries in that area that are still literally plowing their ground with horses, or I'm probably not horses, oxen, would be automated electric tractors, and that the market for automated electric tractors would be in the millions per year.
The fields don't support, aren't large enough and don't support that. It's not as clear to me that is the route forward, because I think industrialization is always the route to wealth. Automating the farming, automating the farming is necessary, but it's an insufficient condition for wealth of a country.
Oh yeah. Oh no, I'm not arguing that.
Yeah. And the other thing is that very small farms, small holdings, are really not very sufficient either. And I'm unfamiliar with the ownership of land in these small villages. I think a lot is owned by very wealthy, very wealthy people who are not farming, actually, who lease out the land or tithe, and these people work on tithe. So it's unclear to me. I don't know enough about it, but I do know that the education system in India is fantastic. And I do know that the graduates we get out of those schools are outstanding. And they are, it reminds me of the kids coming out of British public schools back in the 50s and the 60s, because I was very familiar with that time. And, disciplined, yes, sir, yes, Mr. So-and-so, yes, sir, no, sir, please, thank you. All, just behaviors that we in the West have just lost all touch with, and our kids really don't have. Their education is, particularly since the pandemic, has become so slapdash and so catch as catch can, and so subject to whimsy. It's like night and day. Now, the kids who come out of the top schools, particularly those that are in engineering and in computer science, they are still very well grounded. Attitudes may not be as great as the kids in India, but.
All right, I promised our audience that we would touch on Dojo. I think we want to do a longer thing on Dojo, maybe in the middle of the week. So your background was in software. You mentioned to me that you have some background in language, in deep learning, in particular in, I guess, decision trees and things of that nature. I'm guessing.
Yeah.
And
yes,
I'm looking maybe for you to maybe talk about, is Dojo as big a deal, in your opinion, based on your knowledge, is Dojo as big a deal as I think it is? Well, you don't know about how I think, but
I think it's a very big deal. I think it's a very big deal because it really does enable Tesla to grow that learning environment dramatically without limitation imposed upon them externally. You only have to look at the success of the FSD computer. I was on a call a little bit earlier where somebody was saying, Dojo is not a great idea because it's really hard to compete against volume in the space, and that NVIDIA has the volume and it has the market, and it's really hard to compete. And I think he missed the whole point.
Yes.
I mean, firstly, if you look at the FSD computer, Tesla could have bought, NVIDIA processors. NVIDIA they make a FSD specific computer. It would have cost Tesla several-fold what it's cost them, and it's one of the reasons that those cars are so inexpensive, are so profitable, and so inexpensive to build. And so, NVIDIA can build volume, but that specific computer in the volumes that Tesla need, Tesla are better off doing it themselves, have been better off, and have proven to be better off by doing it themselves. Dojo's in the same boat. Tesla needs massive increase in capability, and I'll talk about why, because sometimes a very surprising reason, it's all about maps actually. They need massive expansion of their training environment. Right now, that massive expansion, there's only one guy with a hand on the valve, and that's NVIDIA. They can open that valve or not, for Tesla or not, and they can price it the way they want to.
Mm-hmm.
So for the specific application that Tesla has, an ideal solution is the same way that they went with FSD, to design their own chip for that particular purpose. Now, it's clear to me that they have decided to expand the chip's capability in version 2 and to reinstate, longer word lengths and to make it a more generalized chip. And that's fine. They're experimenting, they're trying out, and who knows what the combination of chips that they will end up with. But the reason that Tesla are doing what they're doing is not to save money on chips, which is what the argument was, that NVIDIA will be much cheaper, and in any case there are only 2 or 3 fabs that can build this stuff, and you're going to fight for fab space anyway. So my view on that is Tesla will always get the fab space they need because they are the ideal customer, and NVIDIA are not necessarily the ideal customer. That's number one. Number two, a custom chip for this purpose is ideal because the volumes that Tesla need are such that it doesn't so much matter about the price they pay, it matters so much as what they can get. It's exactly the FSD situation, and they will get it at a lower cost because, frankly, cutting out, a single middleman or even 2 middlemen, it's going to save them money. But they need such enormous volume that this is the only solution for them. Now, this gives them multiple potential vendors, because they'll always have NVIDIA, always be available to them, and they will have their own chip. And NVIDIA will, want to sell to Tesla. So I think it's ideal move. Now, why do they need it? Because the training volume is almost endless. Even when they achieve FSD, the training is going to have to continue, both in terms of geographical split, because achieving FSD in the US is very different from achieving FSD in any other domain, whether it's continent or country, or I mean, it's as different in Australia as it is in the US, as it is in Asia, as it is in Europe, and then you have localities as well. So that training has to be going on all the time, and there's constant changes. But even more importantly is maps. I've become convinced from my experience with FSD that Tesla is going to be in the mapping business. Yes, the Google Maps are a great, underlying foundation, but they're going to have to build specific knowledge for FSD, and it's been proven already. They're doing it already. Mm-hmm. Like, my car learned to navigate out of my neighborhood. It was unable to navigate out of my neighborhood. But in the last 2 releases, Tesla have started to introduce localized mapping information based upon driving. So whereas everybody said, well, it's not learning the map, it's learning the driving. No, they've added localized map information, particularly around lanes, and particularly around construction. And they've only just begun it. Greeny only found the code that actually does it. He was the one who, and that is what turned the light on in my head when I realized I couldn't understand how it had improved without a release. Couldn't figure it out. And I knew it had been, because I tested it over and over again. This was my A/B test with every release. But suddenly my A/B test had a C in it. It was fixing itself. Between releases, I couldn't understand it. And it was a very big deal for me, because it was a dead end lane that I have so many dead end lanes getting out of my neighborhood that this dead end lane thing was killing me. And then suddenly I could get out of my neighborhood. How was that possible? And then I read the green the only thing, and I put 2 and 2 together, and Elon actually confirmed it. And I think that this is going to be the key to FSD actually becoming, a full release.
I see.
That there's going to have to be a combination of local knowledge learned and added to the maps, and added, as we move along. And I think this is very important with V4, the chipset with V4, because of the additional capacity. Anyway, that's so if that's true, consider the amount of learning and data that we'll need on a global basis.
Yeah,
it's
huge.
Gigantic.
Absolutely huge. Well, Larry, as I said, that just sets up an opportunity for us to have a much longer conversation about Dojo. Follow Larry at Tesla Larry, which is a great handle. And then, of course, hit the like button, the subscribe button, the notify button, in order to make sure that you don't miss that conversation that Larry and I will have later about Dojo. And then when you hit the like button, that's going to tell me that you like the idea of having Larry come in every Saturday morning, where we will discuss the previous week and what the last week taught us about the market or taught us about Tesla, that we can then apply to the future weeks that are coming up. That, I think, Larry, pretty well summarizes it. Thank you for being on today.
Thanks, Randy. Take care.
And to all of you out there, it's been great talking to you.
Click the link below to get your paperback, Kindle, or audiobook now.